In today's video, we're going to be using the new releases from Roycycled Treasures and Iron Orchid Designs to create this sweet little spring decor piece in a frame. If you don't have a frame, you could use a board. Let's get started. My frame measures a little over 8 by 10 and the frame opening is about a 4 by 6. And so I've had these in my storage for a long time, and so I need to give this a coat of white paint. I'll do 2 coats so that it's ready for decoupage. I'm going to fold my paper and cut a little notch for the center where that frame opening is, and you'll see why this is helpful as we get going. So just like always, I'm going to start by decoupaging one side of my piece, and then I'll move to the other. I'm using a water-based top coat and brushing it on, making sure I get a smooth, even coat. And then I'm going to use plastic wrap to smooth it into place. And that's going to help with the crease that you see in the middle of my paper as well. And you'll see by using that plastic wrap that, and in the next step, in the next picture, you're going to see how that basically just melts away. There was one little spot that you don't even notice. And so once it's decoupaged in place, I'm going to use that notch that we cut, and I'm going to cut to each side and into each corner. This is going to help me from tearing my paper when I go to sand off the edges, and it just releases a lot of the tension in the paper and makes it much easier to remove the excess paper. So this is a good tip when you're working with an opening like that. And so then just in a downward motion, I'm going to sand off all the excess, and we are going to be ready for the next step. I wanted to decoupage that typography love paper, and so I didn't have the backing to this frame, so I just cut a piece of corrugated cardboard from an Amazon box, and I cut it to size. It's a nice tight fit, but in order to decoupage it, again, I want to give it a good coat of white paint so that the paper really pops on this piece. I chose an area, of course it's in the center of the paper, of course it is. And so I just traced that out with a pencil and then just carefully cut around those pencil lines. I cut outside the pencil lines so that I would have enough to work with. And so now it's ready for me to apply to my cardboard. I did notice there was one little element on the paper that I didn't see, that I didn't want on my piece, so I moved it down a little bit, but in the end it still worked out. So with that same water-based top coat, I'm just going to decoupage this little piece of paper onto my cardboard, and I'm not going to seal it right away, but I will seal it because I actually decided that I want to age this paper a little bit. As it is in its original form, it's a very bright white, and I wanted to age that. So before I seal this, it's really important, make sure that you remove any pencil lines with an eraser, because if you seal the paper before you do that, guess what's going to be on your paper? Your pencil lines. So now that the pencil lines were gone, I'm going to go ahead and seal that. And while I've got my medium out, I'm going to go ahead and seal my frame too. When you're aging paper or applying any other medium on top of it, it's really important to seal your paper first. And if you don't, you could end up staining it, causing your paper to become too wet. Any medium that you might have had an oops on is going to be really hard to address. So always seal your paper before adding another type of medium, paint or anything like that first. So to age my paper, I took some warm gray paint and some water, creating kind of a wash, and then using this little makeup blender brush. I love these, by the way. I'm just going to age the paper by rubbing that paint all over and letting it dry. And I feel that now it really coordinates with the burlap roses paper. So the mold, one of the molds that I'm using is the new Sparrow's Nest mold by Iron Orchid Designs. And when I'm working with clay, I always like to use a little cornstarch in my mold. And then I'm using DAS air dry clay. You could use resin. I wanted to be able to easily cut my frame, and that you're going to see me use with the Trimmings One mold. And so I decided to go ahead and use clay. The downside to that is that the Iron Orchid Designs molds are very, very detailed. And sometimes when using clay, it can be difficult to get those little details. So like I'm going to lose that little branch that's just about the bird, above the bird on this, but it all works out in the end. So I use my brayer to make sure that my clay is as smooth as possible, and it really helps to bring out all the details, and I get as much of it out as I can before I scrape it. And then I like to pull my mold away, my silicone mold away from the clay, and that just really helps me, I think. I'm going to take off his little branch or his little legs there, and we're going to go from there. So I like to store my molds under a wet baby wipe while I'm working with more molds and more clay. This just prevents it from drying out too quickly, especially when I have a lot of molds to do. So I did 4 pieces of the Trimmings One mold, and then I placed them on just a little piece of palette paper. It allows me to turn the paper around instead of picking up each mold several times while I'm trying to paint around all the areas. And so I'm giving everything a coat of that same warm gray that I used to age the typography love paper. And I want to make sure that I don't forget to get the ends of my molds, even though I'm going to have to go over those again. And so I'll let this gray paint dry before moving on to the next step. And before I do that, I'm just going to make sure that I get all of the edges. If you have a little cracking, you can always go back in with some more paint, but you want to use a really soft brush for this, and that's so we don't ruin any of the details. Now that the gray paint is dry, I'm going to use this beautiful iridescent gold. This is a golden fluid acrylic. And I love how bright and beautiful it is. And I thought this was a really pretty gold to go with the, I guess it kind of picked up in the color of the flowers in the Burlap Roses paper. And so I would just try a few of your different metallic paints and choose one that you think works best. So that was all done, and now I just wanted to do a little bit of dry brushing over my bird and my nest. And to do that, I love using these little fan brushes. They don't get into the details as easily as a regular paintbrush, and so I find they're perfect for skimming over the highlighted areas of your molds. And so I'll do that on the bird, and then I'm going to do that around the nest. I decided that actually I wanted to make the leaves pop. It was all I could do, you guys, not to take a little clay and make some little eggs for this nest, but who knows, maybe I'll do that later. But for right now, I just want these leaves to pop, and I thought they would be a really pretty accent. So I'm painting them out fully in gold with just a small soft brush. I'm using the Bambles and Berries stamp as a little accent on the typography love paper, and so I'm conditioning it first by going up and down and then left to right with a sanding block. You only have to do this before the first time you use a stamp set, and then it's conditioned and ready to use always. I took an element from that Brambles and Berries stamp set and placed it on an acrylic block. You could use a piece of thin mount or your favorite way of using your stamps. This first use was really light. I really could have stood to use a little more paint, but it's still really pretty, and it just gives the most subtle effect. Paint is sticky, so it may help to pull your backing from the block, and you'll see how I do that. So it's not as easy just to lift up when you're using paint as it is when you're using ink. So you may want to pull the background, and you can see I had more paint on my stamp that time, and so it worked out better. So now I'm going to paint all of the edges with that same gold, and especially paying attention to those areas where I sanded and some of the wood was exposed. And I want to make sure that I get the inside of my frame too. I'm going to go ahead and pop my insert into the back of the frame. Now, I covered the back of my piece with a piece of scrapbook paper, and I didn't show that on camera. So just know that I do finish the backs. And so I'm going to take each of my 4 strips and I'm going to be gluing them on with Quick and Thick's Titebond or Titebond's Quick and Thick glue. And the first thing that I do is kind of make my pieces a little bit smaller, because to create my miters, I'm going to lay one on top of the other, and then I'm going to lay my X-Acto knife on an angle, and I'm going to push down and pull out the excess pieces. And now I have 2 pieces that are going to join together in the corners, and I'm going to do that on all sides. So take your time with this. The clay is malleable, so you do have a little bit to work with. I got a little, maybe too quick around one edge, and it's a little rounded, but I don't think it took away from the piece. I'm using a small silicone spatula. I love these because they're so easy to clean up and reuse. And I'm just making sure that I go edge to edge on all of my trim. You also want to get the ends or those little side pieces where they join, and get a little glue in there too. And then I can just play with the positioning, making sure that each of the pieces of mold are at the edge of that insert of the frame where I want it. And I'm just going to go around and do each piece. I keep them in place while I'm going around, just to make sure that I don't mix them up, because that is a really easy thing to do. If you move your trimming pieces, it's easy to, grab the wrong one. So I find that keeping them in place is the easiest thing to do. So then I played around with the position of my nest and put that in place, again, using that glue, making sure that I get all of the edges end to end, just so I've got really good placement. And again, you can see how that brayer makes it much easier to get your clay flat. And so I know I'm going to get much better adhesion by doing this. So I'll put my nest in place first, and then I thought I'll just have the bird, instead of sitting in the nest, I decided I'd just kind of have him watching over a little bit. So I'm going to position that in place, and then we're going to attach my bird. And I think it's just a really sweet, sweet little piece. I love how it's turning out. One of the things that happens when you're working with clay and you're cutting is you're going to get pieces that now your clay is exposed. So just know that you can come back in, you can fill it in with a little bit of glue if you have a gap, and then just make sure that you take a little bit of paint and paint in any areas that are now exposed again. It's a really quick and simple thing to do. It's going to happen even if you use resin. You're going to have some areas that are exposed, but this is a great time to go ahead and touch up where the clay may have dried and you've got a little bit of a crack. So one of the things that happened was my fingers had paint on them, and I call this a happy accident because I had not planned this step as I was going through the project, but I took out a little piece of my IOD Crack-A-Lure stamp and added that gold paint. And this is what I mean, certainly a happy accident, right? Because I just love how it just gave even more interest and texture to the piece. And I think it was a really fun finishing touch. So the paint can get a little gloppy, so just a light touch, put a little paint on with your brayer and stamp it around. And it just gave a really pretty vintage antique-y touch. Here's how it turned out. I'm really excited to finally have found a use for my frames. Happy creating, everyone.